Galactic Standard Date, year 11356, day 96. Sol Standard Date, 4th of the 8th, 3267. Nuclear fire erupted across the side of Alcaresh and blasted apart his right side. The armor he wore couldn't take the force of dozens of nuclear explosions. The armor ended up becoming molten shrapnel that scattered through his massive body, and the explosion combined with the damage from the shrapnel exposed entire kilometers of Alcaresh's insides to the cold vacuum of space. As the sudden damage dealt to Alcaresh, the warlords that had been watching from the sidelines jumped in between Sylvan and Alcaresh. "Lord Alcaresh, heal yourself immediately. I will deal with this amoeba and give you the time you need." Alcaresh roared in pain as he slowly backed off and started creating a rift large enough for him to pass through. "Thank you, Warlord Raksha. I should have been more aware of sneak attacks to begin with. I will give you supporting fire until I am healed." Raksha lurched forward and swung his limbs towards Sylvan, while Alcaresh fired off dozens of energy bolts. Sylvan growled and shrunk his sword to the size of a dagger, and sent a mental timer on it when it needed to be expanded, before throwing it as hard as he could towards Alcaresh. After tossing his weapon, he poured energy into his claws, and dashed into the forest of tentacles that were bearing down on him. He deftly weaved between a few as he used his claws to gouge deep channels into Rakesh's flesh before an energy bolt swerved behind him, forcing him to defend. The momentary stop allowed Raksha a shot at Sylvan. The two-pronged attack forced Sylvan's hand. It was risky, as he could run out of energy and be left completely defenseless, but he channeled over half of the total Veil energy he had accumulated into one massive flare burst. A massive fluctuation of Veil energy surrounded him as pale green lightning started to discharge from tendrils of black and green energy that swirled around him before a massive detonation, with Sylvan as its center, shook the space around him. The resulting explosion of Veil fire destroyed the dozens of energy bolts Alcaresh had fired. Raksha wasn't so lucky. The blast itself tore the flesh from the two tentacles that were closest to Sylvan, and another three were horribly scorched. The force from the blast had stopped the attacks from both the titanic beings in their tracks. Sylvan hung in space, gasping for air, even though he didn't need to breathe. His body felt like it was on fire and his arm kept twitching, but he was alive. He calmed himself down and stared between the two Azarians. With a grin, he set his sword to grow until it was as big as Thanos' own. He felt a massive drain on his body again and felt physically weak, but he couldn't help letting out a sadistic smile creep across his face as a moon-sized sword appeared directly in front of Alcaresh. For Alcaresh, he had been so distracted with healing his wounds that he had forgotten to keep track of the tiny blade. When it suddenly appeared a few feet from his face, at a size large enough to skewer him completely, he took it a time spell, and felt a cold detachment overtake his mind as time slowed to a crawl. Time dilation didn't make him faster. It simply made it so that he could respond quicker. With this, he was forced to watch his death coming. His senses were heightened enough that he could feel the heat radiating off of the blade. He could hear the slight crackle of Veil energy that managed to reach his ears despite the fact that they were in hard vacuum. And most importantly, he could feel every inch of the blade as it pierced through his face first. The heat from the Veil fire scorching his eyes, and the smell of his flesh burning. He could sense it all. As he watched his death happening in slow motion, he thought to himself, "I, Alcaresh, a being who has lived for literally over a quintillion years within the Veil, and without being killed by some lowly insects, and a furball with knives. Not only that, but the way I'm going to die is so anticlimactic. This is pitiful. I cannot face my lord now, even if I were to be revived. I have failed my master. I have failed myself. And I have failed my god. I deserve..." The sword pierced his brain before he could finish his thought. Raksha hung in space, staring at Alcaresh as the sword skewered him. He forgot about the pain from his torn and scorched limbs as he watched the unacceptable reality unfolding in front of him. Despite his attempts to protect the priest, a minuscule creature, who hasn't even learned how to use his powers properly, managed a calculated surprise attack that killed his charge. As he watched Alcaresh go limp, the sword disappeared. His mind froze for a second at the development, before he realized what just happened. His eyes bulged as he looked back towards Sylvan. It was too late, though. Sylvan had already gotten too close. Before Raksha could even defend himself, Sylvan's blade came down on his head and cleaved him in two. Sylvan had a haggard look as he used the last of his power to summon his sword for one last strike. Drained of all his power, he felt weak, and his vision started fading. His sword shrunk down to its original size, and he let go of it as his mind went blank. He lost consciousness as he floated amongst the three bodies of the massive Azarians. Tel Aktan watched the battle as well as she could. The Azarians were barely visible, as it is, and the Felis they were fighting certainly wasn't. When a massive explosion blew open the side of the Golden Azarian, she grinned wildly and contacted Tamali. "Looks like our nukes paid off. I just watched them open up that fucker like a tin can. Goddess damn, it was beautiful." Tamali sighed. "Aktan, I hope it was enough. I hope that we can make out of this alive, but we already set our moon on course. Regardless, this world is through. I feel guilty." Tel Aktan rolled her antenna and mentally shrugged. "Listen, Mali, all that matters is victory. We were happy we were just denied them their food. Let's be even happier that we were able to actively assist in the battle that may actually kill those assholes." So Mali went silent for a moment before she said a half-whispered, "You're right," and disconnected. Tel Aktan sighed and turned her gaze back up towards the battle above. The warlord had jumped in front of the priest and was seemingly swinging at nothing until a pale green circle appeared in the middle of the tentacles. The light faded away a few moments later. She heard the explosion detonate. A loud crack echoed across the continent, and she saw the few clouds overhead scatter, shortly after a gale force wind kicked up and started tossing loose corpses and spent shells. She and her army gripped onto anything they could as the winds threatened to toss even the massive Azarian corpses they stood on. The wind only lasted a moment, but a few who were taken off guard had been tossed around like ragdolls. She looked around, completely stunned as the surroundings had been changed by a battle that was literally going on in space. She turned her awestruck gaze back to the sky, and watched as a blade that was longer than even the Azarians themselves seemingly materialized out of thin air and impaled the priest. Moments later it completely disappeared and reappeared above the head of the warlord, who was summarily executed with a clean decapitation. After that, the blade disappeared again, and everything went quiet. She kept staring up, wondering what happened, wondering if that battle was actually real and actually over. She got a call from Tel Mali and immediately answered. Mali, is it over?" Tel Mali was silent for a moment before she weakly answered, I think so. All of the magical signatures are gone. I don't have readings on any of the Azarians or the mysterious being who came to our aid."